So my wife and I are mildly active runners, right? Pretty regularly. There's this thing, there's this magazine called Runner's World, and they sponsor this kind of thing a couple times a year. It's called The Streak. And so twice a year, my wife and I are streakers, and what that means is Runner's World, between Thanksgiving and New Year's, they do this thing online and create community online with people all over the country who vow, and you never know if people really do it or not. We do, but who vow to run at least 1 mile a day every day from Thanksgiving to New Year's. And that's called the Runner's World Streak. And so if you do that, you're a streaker. And then they also have one in the summer that goes from Memorial Day to July 4th. So you run 1 mile every day during that period, and you're a Runner's World Streaker. So we do that kind of stuff, and once in a while we'll sign up for a 5K race. And who's run a 5K race? Anyone run a 5-kilometer race? Those are fun, exciting things. And it's kind of like right now, Rally Sunday. There's a lot of excitement at the beginning of the 5K race. And I don't know about you who've run 5K races, but there's always like 3 groups of runners at a 5K race, okay? So you got the people at the front of the line, there's the starting line, and their toes are on it, okay? Ready to go. Their hands are on their watches, ready to push the button as soon as the gun goes, and they will run sprinting most of the race, okay? That's not me. I'm not one of those. But there are those people. And then the second tier are kind of moderately, kind of not quite the real energized people at the front of the line, but want to run a good race. And they'll probably have running watches. They're not towing the line, but they're ready to go, doing some stretches, usually jumping up and down, keeping moving, get the blood going before the race goes. And when the gun goes off, they'll take off right after the real fast people. Then there's the third tier of people who might have just shown up or just tying their shoes, and the gun goes off, and they'll walk to the starting line, and then they'll start to jog. Not run, but jog. I usually find myself in the middle somewhere. But it's always the case for me that the excitement of the race builds this adrenaline inside. And I get caught up at the beginning. I get caught up with the start of the race. And I get caught up sometimes with the finish of the race, where I need to get. And so when the gun goes off with all the adrenaline and excitement, and I never learned this lesson, I don't know why, but it happens every time, I take off too fast. Because it's just exciting, and I want to get to the finish. And I take off too fast, and I know I'm doing it, but everyone else is going fast too. I mean, you want to keep up with what everyone else is doing. And it's usually about 3/4 of the way through the race that I'm like, what is wrong with me? I don't think I'm going to finish. I can't make it the rest of the race. Well, you dummy, you ran too fast at the beginning. You forgot about the journey that you have to take. I rush the start and I forget about the race ahead. I focus too much on the starting line or the end point, and I forget about running the race. I forget about running the race. There's a difference between getting to the destination and running the race. And the difference is huge. The writer of Hebrews here, and you know what? I think that's the case for our faith a lot of the time sometimes. We get excited about Jesus. In days like today, Rally Sunday, excited about all the stuff that's going to happen, and it's an exciting day. You got however many weeks yet to go. There is a destination, but there's a journey to get there. And it's the same with our faith lives. Our experience of faith on Sunday or on Wednesday is exciting when we gather with everyone else, and there's a lot of energy. But what about Tuesday afternoon? What about Thursday morning? What about Wednesday at night when you're putting kids to bed or when you're winding down your day? The writer of Hebrews is writing to this group of Christians who are trying really hard to remember what the destination is. And the writer of Hebrews, in this passage, reminds them of all the people who have come before who didn't even make it to the destination. Twice in the passage I read that they didn't even receive what was promised. Moses, Noah, Abraham, Samson, Gideon, all these figures of faith never received what was promised. The point that the writer of Hebrews is getting at for his audience, and that he'll mention in Hebrews 12, is to run the race. Follow Christ, run the race. Worry about how you run the race. Don't get caught up at the beginning. Don't get caught up with the end point. Worry about how you're running. And in Hebrews 12, he will say running the race is walking step by step in the footsteps of Christ. And those steps are difficult. Those steps are slow. And contrary to the expectations of our world today, those steps don't guarantee the best results all the time. I don't know if you've noticed, but we live in a world that just focuses on results, on productivity. The writer of Hebrews directs his audience's attention not to the results, but to the race. There is a promise, but run the race first. In the gospel passage, the parable of the mustard seed, Jesus says, "The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it's the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it's the largest of garden plants. It becomes a tree so that birds can come and perch in its branches." What Jesus assumes that we don't get because we don't have mustard seed plants. Does anyone have a mustard seed in their garden? You wouldn't anyway, because you don't plant mustard seeds in your garden. The thing that Jesus' audience gets that kind of passes under the radar in this parable, when Jesus talks about what the kingdom of heaven is like, this thing that we're part of on earth right now, is that it's not attractive. A mustard seed is not an attractive plant when it grows up. And it shows up in the weirdest of places. You don't plant it in your garden. You don't plant it next to your crops. It just shows up in weird, dry places where you don't expect something to grow. But it grows. And it's not spectacular, it's not attractive, and it grows slowly. Jesus is talking about what the kingdom of heaven is like. This thing that we're part of on earth right now, we who follow Christ are part of the kingdom of heaven on earth. What is it like? It's like this weird, ugly, strange growing plant. It's not attractive. It doesn't have the coolest results, but it's a home for birds who need a place to rest. People of faith, you are embarking on kind of a new thing in our culture. Every fall we have kickoff Sunday, school starts, there's all this excitement. And sometimes some of you, students, probably are thinking about the end of the school year already. I know you are. And there's a lot of excitement at the beginning of the school year. But there is a race to run. And how you run is what matters sometimes more than the beginning or the end. How we run the race. Who's heard of Starbucks? Most of us. Who knew this about Starbucks? CEO Howard Schultz, in February of 2008, closed over 7,000 stores across the country. Who knew that? Anyone know that? Some of us maybe? Yeah. He shut down all of the stores in the United States on a Tuesday afternoon in February of 2008. Closed them. Gently told customers to go ahead and leave. We're not serving coffee right now. For Howard Schultz, he realized that across his stores, they had forgotten what they were about in the first place. They had gotten too focused on the results. They had gotten too focused on the stock market, on what their earnings were, on getting more customers. They had forgotten what they were doing in the first place. They had forgotten how to run the race. And so he shut down all the stores to recalibrate for everyone who is part of Starbucks what it meant to be part of Starbucks in the first place, what they stood for and existed for. And as you can imagine, nearly everyone on the whatever it is, the board, the committee, tried to tell Howard Schultz not to do this. They warned him of the side effects of what would play out if this would happen. You're going to lose money now. You're really going to lose money. You're going to lose stock. People are going to wonder what's wrong with Starbucks. You might lose customers. But Schultz was so committed to the vision of what Starbucks needed to be about and to reminding every store and every employee what it meant to be part of Starbucks that he went ahead and said, no, we're going to shut down so that we can remind ourselves who we are. And he did lose money. And people wondered what was wrong. I think in Schultz's mind it paid off. Sometimes I wonder if in our lives of faith, and even for the church, I'd like to see a church shut down all operations as an experiment. Wouldn't that be interesting? Shut down all programming, all operations for a month, 3 months, 6 months, a year. And just remember and function as the body of Christ together and remember what it is that we are in the first place. No church is going to do that. But wouldn't it be interesting to just focus on what it means to live out the Sermon on the Mount with one another? To be a community where not the proud and the popular are welcomed, but the poor in spirit. Where the meek inherit the earth. Where we are known as peacemakers. Where those who mourn are comforted. To remember what it is that Jesus called us to be as the body of Christ in the first place. Or to just take some time and intentionally live out 1 Corinthians 13. The love that Paul calls us to be as the body of Christ. Patient, kind, not boasting, not seeking our own way, considering others greater than ourselves, looking out for the needs of the world beyond our own self-interests. That's what running the race is about. We are called as the body of Christ, as people who follow Jesus, to run the race a certain way. Not to get swept up at the beginning, starting line, not to get caught up in getting to the end, but to run the race a certain way, and that way looks like Jesus. That way looks like the Sermon on the Mount. That way looks like 1 Corinthians 13. And when we do that well, body of Christ, when we do that well, the world notices because it is something that the world has never seen. Because guess what? And you probably know this, the world is incapable of doing these things because the Spirit of God is the only thing that makes this go. As we begin our fall this year, and I know in churches, we get swept up in the programming and the events and the things. But let's not forget what it is we're called to be in the first place. That the programming and the events and all the other things are supposed to point to. A community where the poor in spirit thrive. A community where those who mourn are comforted. Where we're known as people who are peacemakers. Where we are the meek of the world. That's how we run that race, following in those steps of Christ. May you, as First Lutheran Church, remind each other of that as you gather every week. Can you remind each other of that as you see each other throughout the week on a Tuesday or Wednesday? You are the salt and light of Spencer and the surrounding area. Focus on the race. Don't get caught up in the beginning. Don't get swept up in the finish. Don't rush the start. Run the race.